the unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect truth, is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see it, hear it, one can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. I'm going to attempt today to cover both sections 3 and 4 of the Surangama Sutra. And I'm going to drastically shorten the section on the womb of the Tathagata, or the matrix of the thus come one. Makes more sense to me, the womb of the Tathagata, so I'm going to use that terminology. And then I hope to cover the section on the coming into being of the world of illusion. This very long section on the matrix of the thus come one, or the womb of the Tathagata, is really basically covered in this first paragraph. Ananda, you have not yet understood that the objects we perceive are unreal and illusory. They are subject to change, appearing here and disappearing here and there. Yet these illusions, each with its conventional designations, are in fact within the essential wondrous enlightenment. The same is true of the 5 aggregates, the 6 faculties, that is the 6 senses, the 12 sights, that's the 6 senses plus the objects of sense, and the 18 constituent elements, which then includes the 6 consciousnesses that arise from the contact of the senses with the objects of sense. It is an illusion that they come into being when both their causes and conditions are present. And it is an illusion that they cease to be when either their causes or conditions are absent. You simply have not yet understood that fundamentally. Everything that comes and goes, that comes into being and ceases to be, is within the true nature of the womb of the Tathagata, which is the wondrous, everlasting understanding, the unmoving, all-pervading, wondrous suchness of reality, including catfights. But though you may seek within this everlasting reality of the womb of the Tathagata for that which comes and goes, for confusion and awakening, and for coming into being and ceasing to be, you will not find them there. What he's saying there, that illusion or delusion can arise within enlightenment. That the enlightened nature can embrace and accept all these delusions. It embraces the wars and the catfights and the suffering, the angers, frustrations, the fears, all of the things that we perceive as barriers to complete peace. It's all embraced there. It arises there and it dissolves there, and it's still an illusion. But within the enlightenment itself, you can't find the illusions. What happens during this reading about explaining this is that Ananda realizes that the old way of thinking, that the purpose for training is to get enlightened so that you don't have to come back and be reborn again. if you truly realize the nature of the illusion of existence, then the parameters shift, and it becomes essential to raise the mind to the bodhisattva. So at the end of this, Ananda makes a vow. At that time, Ananda and the rest of the great assembly, having received the subtle and wondrous instructions given by the Buddha, the Tathagata, felt that their bodies and minds were emptied and hardly seemed to exist. They were free of all concerns and impediments. All in the assembly became aware that their minds pervaded the 10 directions, and that they could see everything throughout space in all 10 directions, as clearly as one might see an object, such as a leaf in the palm of one's hand. They saw that all things in all worlds are the wondrous, fundamental, enlightened, luminous mind that understands. And that this mind, pure, all-pervading, and perfect, contains the entire universe. They looked back upon their own bodies, born of their parents, and saw them to be like minute particles of dust, drifting about everywhere in the air, arising and perishing, or like solitary bubbles floating on a vast, calm sea, appearing and then vanishing without a trace. They fully understood the fundamentally wondrous mind is everlasting and does not perish. Then Ananda, having understood what he had not understood before, bowed to the Buddha. Placing his palms together, spoke these verses in the Buddha's praise. The deep and wondrous honored one, all-knowing, pure and still, Surangama, the king of mantras, rarest in the world, extinguishes distorted thoughts from countless eons past. No need to wait forever to attain the Dharma body. I vow to reach enlightenment, and as a Dharma king, return to rescue beings countless as Ganges sands. This deep resolve I offer in the myriad Buddha lands. By this may I repay the kindness shown to me by the Buddha. I ask the Buddha to be witness as I take this vow, to enter firstly the murky realms of the 5 turbidities. If even just one being still has not become a Buddha, then I will wait before I seek the leisure of nirvana. Greatest in valor and in power, great compassionate one, I pray that you'll now eradicate the subtlest of my doubts and lead me quickly to attain supreme enlightenment, and sit within the places for awakening everywhere. If emptiness should vanish, even that will never shake this Vajra solid vow. So the next part of this sutra is the Buddha explaining how it is that the delusion arose within the midst of this understanding. And here we meet Purna Maitreya Yaniputra, who stood amidst the great assembly. He uncovered his right shoulder, knelt with his right knee on the ground, and respectfully placed his palms together and said to the Buddha, "World-honored one, you who are foremost in virtue and inspiring awe have just now eloquently proclaimed for the sake of all beings the ultimate truth taught by the Buddhas. The Buddha has often praised me as the one most skilled in expounding the Dharma, but as I have been listening to the thus come one's voice, as he has been setting forth the subtle and wondrous Dharma, I might as well be a deaf man trying to hear a mosquito from a distance of more than 100 paces. Such a man could not even see the mosquito, let alone hear it. Although the Buddha's clear explanations have largely dispelled my doubts, I have not yet reached the point at which I might thoroughly understand this truth, and so be free of doubts entirely. World Honored One, although Ananda and those like him have become enlightened, they have not yet put an end to their habits and outflows. But I am amongst those of the assembly who are free of outflows, and yet, having just now heard the Buddha explain the Dharma, I find that I am assailed by doubts. World Honored One, if in fact the aggregates, the faculties, and the various perceived objects and the consciousnesses are all in the matrix of the Thus Come One, or the womb of the Tathagata, which is itself fundamentally pure, then how is it that suddenly there came into being the mountains, the rivers, and all else on earth that exists subject to conditions? And why are all these subject to the succession of changes, ending and then beginning again? So the Buddha then tells Purna and all the other arhants that he will explain how this all came together. The Buddha said, when we talk about this understanding which characterizes enlightenment, do we mean an understanding that is intrinsic to our inherent enlightened nature? Or does our inherent enlightenment lack understanding until we gain it when enlightenment is realized? And Purna said, our inherent enlightenment is characterized by understanding only when that understanding is added to it. Uh-oh. He's just stepped into a pile. Slippery goo. The Buddha said, suppose, as you say, that for our inherent enlightenment to be characterized by understanding, that understanding must be added to it when enlightenment is realized. But an enlightenment to which an understanding is added cannot be true enlightenment. Such an enlightenment would indeed lack understanding if understanding were not added. But an enlightenment that lacks understanding cannot be true intrinsic enlightenment, that is inherently pure and endowed with understanding. Therefore, if you think that an understanding must be added to your inherent enlightenment, you are falsifying the true understanding, the true enlightenment. That is, nothing need to be added to true enlightenment. But once an understanding is added, nevertheless, that understanding must understand something. Once the category of something understood is mistakenly established in the mind, then the category of that which understands is mistakenly established as well. At first, there was neither sameness nor differentiation, but then that which is differentiated is clearly distinguished. That which differs from what is differentiated is distinguished by being uniform. Because the category of what is differentiated and the category of what is uniform has been established, the category of what is neither uniform nor differentiated is further established. In other words, once we start breaking up enlightenment and there's somebody who thinks they've understood and something they think they've understood, then all sorts of things, different categories follow from that. And what the Buddha is pointing to is that the enlightenment is already whole and complete, and it exists within everything. It's the illusion of self that sets us apart from that enlightenment. And this comes out of thinking there's something that has to be understood. Just as we heard, the definition of prajna is that which is before knowledge. That great wisdom and compassion exist without having to intellectually understand it. And this creates turmoil, this intellectual understanding. The turmoil of this mutual complementary gives rise to mental strain. And the mental strain is prolonged. Grasping at objects of mind begins. Mental strain and grasping at objects together create a turbidity of mind, out of which the afflictions are generated. Motion becomes the world of perceived objects, and stillness is distinguished as space. In addition to space, which is undifferentiated, and the world, which is differentiated, are conditioned phenomena that are neither differentiated nor the same. Once the light of understanding is added to enlightenment, the darkness of the primary element space appears. And the interaction of these two complements generates a disturbance in the mind. That disturbance becomes a disc. A disc is actually the translation of the word mandala. And I think mandala is probably easier to understand. That disturbance becomes a mandala of wind. That is the essence of the primary element, wind. And this mandala then supports the world of perceived objects. In reaction to the mental disturbance generated by the interaction of the darkness of mental space and the understanding that has been added, there arises a firm attachment to that understanding. And this firm attachment is categorized as solidity. This solidity is the mandra of the Vajra, which is the essence of the primary element, earth. This is how, from the firm attachment to the light of added something, the disk or the mandala of Vajra, which holds the world, comes into being. I think I'm not going to read all of the details of how each thing follows, how all these things follow one after the other. And this isn't, this is a spiritual explanation, not a temporal one. This has nothing to do with some sort of spiritual evolution, although if it is an evolutionary process, it is a spiritual evolutionary process. The important thing to understand here is that the turbulence of our suffering is created by our attachments and by attachment to knowledge and attachment to afflictions. And this all comes as a result of trying to add understanding to original enlightenment. The fact that we cling to this illusion is what causes rebirth. The next section of this is on the Buddha's enlightenment is irreversible. And it's only at the stage of becoming a Buddha where that enlightenment is irreversible. As you'll see in section 10, there are a lot of places, even as you go higher on in your training and practice, that there's no safe place until you get to become a Buddha. And that probably isn't very safe either. the Buddha had his cousin try to kill him a couple of times and did not necessarily have an easy life of it. The next part of this is Purna asking the Buddha how these primary elements can be interfused. And so the Buddha responds, he says, you should realize that all these phenomena are fundamentally unreal. And so one cannot specify anything about them. To assert anything about them would to be as absurd as to expect illusory flowers in the sky to bear fruit. How then can you ask whether the primary elements will overcome each other in mutual annihilation? You should realize that in their fundamental natures, the primary elements are a single reality, which is simply the wondrous awakened enlightenment, the wondrous awakened enlightened mind. Fundamentally, the primary elements of water, fire, and the rest do not exist at all. Why then do you keep asking about how they can exist together? He then goes on to explain basically what we say every morning in the Scripture of Great Wisdom. Within the fundamental, the womb of the Tathagata, the fundamental wondrous mind, it is not the distinction-making mind, nor is it space, nor is it earth, nor is it water or wind or fire. It's not the eye faculty, not the ear faculty, not the nose faculty, not the tongue faculty, nor the body faculty, nor the cognitive faculty. Neither is it visible objects nor sounds, nor odors or flavors or objects of touch. It's not objects of cognition. It's not eye consciousness, nor mind consciousness, nor any of the other consciousness. It is neither the fundamental ignorance that is added, the adding of an understanding to our inherent enlightenment, nor is it the ending of that ignorance, nor is it old age and death, nor the ending of old age and death. And then he says, and yet it's all of those things. It is the distinction-making mind. It is space. It is earth. It is water. It's wind and fire. It's everything that he just said it wasn't. And then he says, it is apart from is and is not. And yet both is and is not. How then, with their conscious minds, could beings who are bound to worlds in the three realms of existence, or even world-transcending hearers of the teachers and solitary sages, possibly fathom the supreme enlightenment of the Buddhas? How could they gain the Buddha's ability to know and to see merely by using the world's words? You just can't understand it with words, and it's not something you'll get with the intellectual mind. Marvelous sounds can be brought forth from lutes, harps, and mandolins only when there are skilled fingers to play them. In the same way, all beings, including you, are fully endowed with this resplendent, enlightened, true mind. When I arrange my figures to form the ocean mudra, the light of the ocean mudra samadhi shines forth. But the moment a thought arises in your mind, you must endure the stress of involvement with perceived objects. It is simply because you have not diligently pursued the path to supreme enlightenment. Instead, you are fond of the lesser vehicle and are content with the lesser goal. It's just because we are still attached to this world of perceived objects and the illusion of a self that we don't understand this enlightenment completely. And at the same time, the training is enlightenment. Making the effort to do something about the delusion is in fact enlightenment. And you don't have to understand it, you just have to do it. So Purna asked further to have further instruction. So the Buddha is telling Purna, you've put your coarser doubts to rest, but your more subtle doubts have not yet been ended. I will now question you about a matter by referring to a mundane event. Have you not heard about Yajnadatta, the man from Savasti, who saw his face with perfectly clear features in a mirror one morning and became enraptured with it? Then he became upset because he supposed that he had lost his own face. It struck him that he must have turned into a headless ghost. For no good reason, he ran madly about out of his house. What do you think? What caused this man to run madly about for no good reason? And Purna said, well, he was clearly insane. There was nothing else that was the cause. The Buddha said, the luminous understanding of wondrous enlightenment is perfect. That fundamental, perfect, luminous understanding is wondrous. How could there be in it any basis for what is clearly a delusion? If there were a basis for this delusion, how could it be that we call it deluded? Thus your deluded thoughts have followed one upon the other, each one leading to the next. Confusion is added to confusion, eon after countless eon, numberless as motes and dust. Although the Buddha can reveal this process to you, he cannot reverse it for you. What is important to realize is that the delusion exists within enlightenment. Master Ji used to say, the truth does not insist on truth. She would say that primarily when somebody was insisting on having their own way, when she'd ask something to be done that they weren't doing. But it has a much deeper implication. Dogen talks about there is delusion within delusion within enlightenment, and enlightenment within enlightenment. Most of us are deluded within enlightenment. Yajnadatta was probably an example of delusion within delusion. And the Buddha is the example of enlightenment within enlightenment. But there is no cure for Yajnadatta's problem. Because you can't give him his head back. He hasn't actually lost it. All that is needed is for you to not follow after the distinctions you make concerning the perpetuations, the worlds, beings, and the retribution in accordance with karma. Once you have eliminated the three conditions, greed, anger, and delusion, that are necessary for rebirth, these causes will not become active again. What need is there to work yourself to a bone in pursuit of awakening? The Buddha then recounts the story from the Lotus Sutra I mentioned at the discussion last night about the man with the wish-fulfilling jewel or pearl sewn into his coat. Destitute and homeless, he begs for his food. Someone wise points out to him that he has this pearl, and he becomes very rich. And he realizes that this magical pearl can only have come from within himself. This is the magical pearl of Buddha's training and practice. And it exists within your own heart. Then Ananda came forward from his place in the great assembly to bow at the Buddha's feet. He stood and said to the Buddha, "World-honored one, you've just now been saying that once we put to rest the karma of killing, stealing, and sexual desire, so that these conditions no longer arise. Their three causes will not become again active. Then the madness of our minds, that is like Yajnadatta's madness, will cease of its own accord. And that ceasing itself is full awakening, which no one else can bestow upon us. Isn't all this clearly an example of the workings of causes and conditions? Why then does the Buddha now reject the doctrine of causes and conditions? World-honored one, it was through hearing about causes and conditions that I became enlightened, as did others of us younger hearers of the teachings who still need instructions. Here also in this assembly now, Mahamoggallana, Shariputra and Subhuti and others have once followed Brahmin elders. They too heard the teachings about causes and conditions, and as a result, they made the resolve to enter the monastic life. They put an end to their outflows and became enlightened. Now you say that one does not, after all, realize enlightenment through causes and conditions. If that is so, the ultimate truth must be as Maskara Gosaliputra and those others in the Rajagriha teach, that enlightenment happens on its own. I only hope that the Buddha will now compassionately clear up the confusion which has been suffocating us. The Buddha said to Ananda, "Let us compare what you have just said to the case of Yajnadatta. If the causes and conditions for his madness were to disappear, his sanity would naturally reappear on its own. Your argument concerning causes and conditions and things coming into being on their own amounts to nothing more than that, Ananda. His head was just as it always was. It was already fundamentally part of him. Otherwise, he would not have been who he was. How then could causes and conditions be involved in his running madly about out of fear that his face had disappeared? His head was intact from the beginning. But if his madness were indeed due to causes and conditions, wouldn't causes and conditions have also led to his head actually disappearing? Yet his head has always been present. His madness and terror arose from delusion. No actual change had taken place. How could his madness have arisen from causes and conditions? If this madness were fundamentally part of him, if madness and terror were the way that he was from the first place, then why would his madness not have been already evident? But if his madness was not fundamentally part of him, and he was not deluded about his head all along, why did he run madly about? Had Yajnadatta awakened and realized that his head was fundamentally part of him, he would have understood that his running about was madness. From this, it should be clear that your objective about causes and conditions, about things coming into being on their own, cannot be taken seriously. I'm not going to read all of this, but therefore, Anandi, the many eons that you have spent committing to memory the Buddha's esoteric, inconceivable, wondrous, and majestic Dharma are not equal to a single day spent cultivating karma that is free of outflows and is far removed from the true worldly torments of hate and love. The young Matanga woman was a courtesan, and yet her love and desire were dispelled by the spiritual power of the mantra. Now she is a nun named Prakriti. She and Rahula's mother, Yashodhara, have both become aware of their previous lives. They know that among the causes of their actions during many lifetimes, their craving for emotional love was the cause of their suffering. Now, they have escaped their bonds and have received predictions of Buddhahood. Why do you then continue to cheat yourself by standing still, merely watching and listening? Then Ananda and the others in the Great Assembly, when Ananda and the others in the Great Assembly had heard the Buddha's instructions, their doubts and delusions were dispelled, their minds awakened to the truth, and in body and mind they felt a serenity they had never known before. What he's saying here is that our clinging to the illusion of a self is like a Yajnadara running around looking for his head. We're spending all this time trying to create a someone when in fact we're denying our Buddha nature. However innumerable beings may be, I vow to save them all. However inexhaustible the passions may be, I vow to transform them all. However limitless the Dharma may be, I vow to comprehend it completely. However infinite the Buddha's truth is, I vow to realize it. Homage to the Buddha. Homage to the Dharma. Homage to the Sangha.